pass from Havili was magic. The shift on for Crotty. Boom, far down you go, Quackett Smith. Me, oh my, I have enjoyed that. Yes, boy.
Sit back, relax, put your belt on, and enjoy the show.
All right, welcome to the Draft Rugby Show. I'm your host, Cargie, and tonight we will discuss the Pumas' absolute thumping of the All Blacks. Oh, wait, hold on, maybe not. I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Harry and Nelson, and we're backing up with another special guest this week after having our South American correspondent, the great man Paul Tate, at America's Oval, joining us last week. So huge thanks to Paul. He really is our go-to man for all things America's rugby, but particularly Argentina. So that was great. This week, we're fortunate enough to be joined by an absolute superstar, Squidge Rugby. If you are listening to our podcast, you have definitely heard of him. Otherwise, you can stop listening now. But no, just although I was going to say, I think he was very close a few weeks ago to changing his name and his channel name to The Moss Rugby.
Oh, it certainly came into consideration. Just dropping everything and doing it in Spanish as well, despite what my GCSE results suggested.
That would have been impressive. That would have been very impressive.
Yeah.
Well, welcome and thank you very much for joining us. It's fantastic to have you. It's early in the morning in the UK. But look, Squidge, yeah, he has been absolutely killing it. His YouTube channel at Squidge Rugby growing rapidly. I think it's almost up to 500,000 subscribers now. He's a movie star featuring in documentaries, chasing the sun. I mean, it's sky's the limit from here. So look, thanks very much for joining us and welcome to the Draft Rugby Show.
No, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Now, I did joke about the Pumas thumping the All Blacks. That did happen a few weeks ago, and we could just talk about that this entire pod. I'm sure Squidge would love that. But no, look, it was a different result this week. And actually, before we get into it, I do have to say, so I've said you can find Squidge on at Squidge Rugby on YouTube, on Twitter. Same with us. We're on YouTube now as well. This video call and will be up and podcast as well. So get after us as well if you can. But look, as I said, sorry, Nelson, you go.
Don't expect as well produced videos. It's Harry, doing careful chop and change. Might have like a little logo just in the top left corner. That's about it.
Harry's actually waiting for the course to come out, the Squidge Rugby course.
See, this is tip one in the course is don't have my face in it. So you failed there already. You've already slipped up.
We started this podcast because we knew we didn't have, we had the face for a podcast, and now we're doing videos. So
I don't know why.
Something is wrong there.
It's a grey area. It's a grey area. Yeah. There's a reason I hide mine till the end, till you've already watched most of it, and then you're like, here he is. Ooh, no, I can tune out now. I'm done. The content's finished.
I've only tuned out at the end of one of your videos when you started apologising for tearing apart Ted Flanagan and saying he actually had a good game. I was like, nope, all right, I'm done now with this video. That's fine. I won't have it. But, look, that's foreshadowing. We'll get on to a preview of that game. Nels, my first question for you is, obviously New Zealand winning this one in an emphatic fashion. Who did you must not have bet on the All Blacks this week as the trend has been going?
Just to fill you in, Squidge, whenever I bet for the All Blacks, they lose. And I think I've done it twice in my entire life. But I did bet on them to win, but not by this much. So, there's a part of the trend still happening this week. But, I didn't think they were going to break away this much.
Very good. All right. Well, look, I've been doing a lot of talking. So, Harry, why don't you launch us into the entree? We're going to start with reviewing. Let's talk about the game. New Zealand 38, Argentina 0. Harry, take it away.
So, obviously, just quickly covering off the injuries. The one that we saw was Guido Petti going down with the ankle injury, taped up, and managed to play on. Nelson, you were particularly unimpressed with how he finished the game as the great lock that he was.
Yeah, that Tuipulotu try right at the end. I think he got caught out massively, defending on the man inside him and not looking up at all and being very slow in his lateral movement. But yes, you can forgive him a little bit for his slow lateral movement with that ankle sprain, but he was just largely out of position for mine. I thought that was pretty critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Off the bat, I guess the big change with this one was obviously the Argies made 10 changes to their starting lineup. So huge upset to their cohesion. And I mean, Squidge, you obviously had a better look at how the Argies played in the earlier games of the Tri-Nations than what we have. What did you notice as the big difference between their performance this week compared to earlier in the competition?
Yeah, I think those changes did make a difference. It's kind of, that level of cohesion and so on. And it's entirely fair enough. A lot of those players who didn't play in those first two games were still quarantined to go through the same things that the others did, and have been away from their family for months. And so they want to have a game, and it entirely makes sense. But it was a lot of change to make it once. And I felt the All Black kicking game really caught them out. I thought the All Black kicking game was fantastic. It was very, very good. And they completely changed their back three from that first game. And obviously, Buffelli came in last week. But it was... Yeah, I thought that really caught them out. I don't know if it was just a cohesion thing. I've only watched the game once so far from Saturday. But it felt a lot like they just kept catching them shallow. And also, I think De La Fuente had a good game generally, but there are a few times where Chocobares was dropping back and helping cover little chips, and also was often back, was really useful on rather a kick chase. De La Fuente wasn't quite doing that. And they had him almost man marking Caleb Clark as their biggest back, or marking the opposition's biggest back on kick return. So there's a few little bits that you felt like Argentina, partly through that changes, partly through just the All Blacks being far better and being far more on it, and having had time to look at that Argentina performance and go, okay, how can we stop this, and what do we have to do to shut them down? I felt it was interesting. And very, very good, very effective from the All Blacks.
Yeah, I think one of the things they did early in that game, to sort of attack that defensive 15-man wall that you see with Argentina, and that line speed was that little chip over the top. Was there anything else you saw that you thought they changed up this week to try and attack differently with that high line speed?
I think it was firstly just generally the way they kicked very shallow. So they were kicking quite close to behind the defensive line. So it was easy to get several men up in chase. You're not looking at just one wing and kind of going all or nothing, diving for it, which was A, very useful, and B, was pulling Argentina, who typically were dropping wingers far deeper in the past couple of games, bringing them up far narrower, and then they were left kind of confused to where they were positioning themselves. And that does, especially when you get into the second half, will start to create more space if the defence aren't quite sure where they need to stand, if they're given lots of different reasons to stand in different positions, particularly out wide. So that began to create a bit of space. And the other thing is, I think they just managed to keep at Argentina in a way until they started to slip back into being the panicky old team they have been past. In that way that sometimes they will chase again, they will play too hard, and they will play too much, and they will throw interception passes, and they will kick loosely. And in the end, Will Jordan found that out, and but it took a bit of a softening up, both physically, as you'd expect, and also kind of mentally, and they started to get into, we need to chase this, and we need to throw mad passes that aren't on to Will Jordan.
Watching that really intimidating 15-man defensive wall that Argentina put forward, I thought they looked like they set up similarly, and I could see that had a little bit of depth in their back three to start the game. But trying to watch in the second half if they did kind of veer away from that tactic, and I remember looking for it around the 60-minute mark and seeing that they did present a pretty similar line. Did they change the way they defended when those short kicks started to break them apart a little bit?
There were a couple of times you were noticing Sanchez certainly starting to drop deeper. And then they weirdly put Carreras on at 10. So I didn't realise he could play 10 until he came on there. That was a lesson. That was something we learned. But he then, I don't know if it was why, but he then did start to drop back further defensively and almost play as a second fullback, as he did, obviously starting fullback a couple of weeks ago, and last week indeed. Yeah, it was happening occasionally. As I say, I've only watched the game back once, but there were moments in which you were seeing, I think Mojano got caught out on just being stood too deep at one point, and then All Blacks kicking quite shallow, kicking quite close to the line. So if nothing else, even if they are committing to what they're doing, they were adding some doubt to individual players' minds. And you were seeing, I think, the back three in particular, and then you add in the 10 and the 9 and, other players around there being slightly slower to drop back and slower to change.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's great. I think, it was interesting. We learned that from Paul last week about Carreras in that, I wanted to see some more of Domingo Miotti on the bench. I think he's an exciting prospect, but Carreras was the cover for 10, so they thought they didn't really need a 10 on the bench the last couple of weeks. But interesting decisions, those ones. You make a great point. You've only watched the game one time. How many times do you typically watch a game to I guess, come up with the level of insights and analysis that you come up with?
It'll usually be about 3 times. I'll usually watch it kind of live and kind of get an impression and a feel for it. Then I'll watch it back again and kind of, go through it, and I'll slow down and pause on bits. And then I'll go back a 3rd time. And it used to be far more than this. I've kind of got it down to quite a fine art. I'll then watch it back a 3rd time as I'm kind of writing the script and as I'm kind of working out what I'm doing. So that I'm kind of adding in extra bits. And sometimes I'll notice something as I'm watching it through there that I didn't notice in my kind of quite thorough notes and so on. So I've managed to get it down to 3 times, but
that's
you then end up seeing it far more when you're actually editing, pulling the footage out of those bits and so on. So it like the World Cup final last year, I've probably watched beginning to end about 3 times, probably maybe 4. But because I'm so familiar with the footage from pulling it out, like I will see the bits you mentioned Chasing the Sun, and I was watching it back.
Yeah.
There are moments it'll cut to like a reaction shot of Peter Steph the toy, and I'll go, "Oh, that's in the 60-second minute," because I just know that inside out.
Yeah.
Because I've just learned from watching it over so many times and skimming through. I know roughly everything that happens in sequence, like I'm a South African.
So your special trick, if you ever go on a game show of like, play the Rugby World Cup final, and I'll tell you what happens I'll tell you what minute it is at any point, any clip.
Yeah.
You give us.
It's a completely useless skill.
Yeah, that's a good, very mild superpower.
I think we probably watched the game. We probably watched the game 2 times. It just depends on how many beers we've had in the first one. Basically, that's
Definitely.
There's always the trick, isn't there? There's always the secret. I sometimes think that people will say, "God, you notice so much when you watch rugby," and it's like, no, I just generally watch it sober. That's been my trick.
It's definitely the trick to it.
Yeah.
Going.
That's it.
Going.
Well, yeah. In terms of the stats, look, New Zealand obviously dominated possession and territory. Possession about 66% it ended up, and territory 79%. It is pretty difficult to win a ball game when you only have 20% of the territory. So it was interesting. Similarly, New Zealand had a really good kicking game. They ended up with a similar amount of kicking meters, both teams, which was interesting. But New Zealand they committed to a game plan of take the points when they're on offer. They learned that lesson. Beat them up front with the physicality. And yeah, as we've talked about, the variation, the spreading it wide, trying lots of things to unsettle that Argentinian defensive wall and just really pick up the pace of the game, which is where they play some of their best footy. I think we often talk about how we feel a game's going to go based on the haka. Nelson, what's the name they did there? I guess their most terrifying haka for this game. So they announced they were all business. Nelson, what's this one called?
I'm not sure why I'm getting thrown under the bus, but it's the kapa or pango. That could be horribly wrong pronunciation, but we'll stick with it.
Yeah. And that's the throat slitting type one kind of at the end there, which just was great. But I mean, look, it was nice of them to put down that Maradona jersey as well. I thought that was a good sign of respect for a legend. So, but yeah, no, I think they came out. If you give New Zealand after a loss 2 weeks to prepare against any team, and after a loss, chances are they're going to win that game and they're going to come out firing. So, I think Argentina kind of knew what they were up against. The penalty count in this one was different. So it was kind of reversed. We said last time a lot of things kind of went against the All Blacks, but this week double the penalties conceded by Argentina, 14-7. So that's certainly played into their hands. I don't know. What do you think, apart from the set piece, the obvious ones, what do you think, I guess, where were their main areas they were much more disciplined in this week's game?
I think as well as obviously the scrum is the big one. That was a huge difference from the first game, and I think having two different props out did change things, and it changed a bit in the second half when they changed the front row. But I think generally there were those daft penalties. I think we kind of associate with Argentina in past started to creep in a bit. So Kramer gave away a couple of penalties, then got kind of hauled off, having been one of the best players on the pitch in both the games they played up until now. He started to just sneak a bit into letting things slip and giving a penalty at the breakdown. And they started to do that, just kind of little niggle penalties, little penalties they don't need to give, where they'll kind of dive over the top of a ruck or they'll shove someone without the ball. And part of that comes from frustration. And part of it, I think, comes from them. They've spent the last however long they've been training together, because it has seemingly been a very long time. You've been seeing the odd clip on social media of what they call the Pumas. That's the one. I went through all three teams in this competition before I got there. You've been seeing odd clips of Argentina kind of training together for seemingly about 6 months. And they've very much been thinking about and aiming for that All Blacks game. And I think you can probably keep yourself sharp when you're aiming for one game, and that's been the whole focus. And then they kind of were able to find a bit of a second wind for the Wallabies last week and kind of go, okay, right, we can do this again. Picked up by having won. And I think this kind of became they're letting old habits slip back in, because there isn't the novelty. There isn't the kind of the same motivation. I'm not saying they're unmotivated, but there's this kind of there's a slightly less focus on it. Sure. So yeah, I think they just it was just silly penalties, really. It's just penalties they didn't need to give away. And the best teams, the All Blacks, as we saw, don't give those penalties away on the whole. And you can often see, there are certain penalties the teams start to give them away quite regularly. If it's more than one or two a game, you kind of know they're going to lose. And Argentina gave away, 5 or 6 of those when against the All Blacks, they didn't really give away any on the first time around.
I think they actually had considered 4 scrum penalties as well, which is absolutely massive. With those changes you're talking about with the All Blacks props, Nepo Laulala, I think having a massive impact. I think Cargie thinks offers their best tight head, but with Nepo scrummaging like that, he's having a huge impact.
You can't write off Moody as well. I thought Moody has this ability, and let's just say, Squidge, that none of us are fans of Moody. Dane Coles gets a big rap to say that he's the dirtiest player in New Zealand. I reckon Joe Moody is far and away the dirtiest player in New Zealand, because they're always just dirty dog shots. But that's not the point of this. Joe Moody has this ability for the Crusaders and for the All Blacks, when they really decide that they're going to go after a team scrum because they believe it's their team's weapon. For some reason, he's just the one player who can go from kind of playing a quiet role in the scrum and then just demolishing a team in the scrum when you never think it's going to happen. And it's just so impressive. And he just games to do it.
Yeah.
I never thought about it like that, but that's right. That is exactly what seems to happen. And it's always, if he gets destroyed a game beforehand, he will always, even that way you always say about the All Blacks generally.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Moody will bounce back. He will eat you.
Yeah, no, I think, I certainly think Offa Tu'ungafasi is their best all-round prop. And I think you guys, we're very critical of their scrum, just in terms of, we think that Argentina's, the Wallabies, we think a lot of countries really have it over New Zealand in the scrum, but we never seem to get the amount of pay that we think we deserve in that regard. But I think Nepo Laulala is New Zealand's best tight head prop in the scrum. Just the way he's built, all-round player, certainly Offa Tu'ungafasi, but Nepo, he really, that was his role, and he nailed it, didn't he? 4 penalties, that's huge.
I always, with Tu'ungafasi, think about when he's playing under 20s for New Zealand. And he was at tight head the first time the Welsh under 20s ever beat the baby Blacks. And he was absolutely destroyed all game long. Like, he was being pushed off his own ball by 10 metres. And I kind of went, this guy is twice the size of anyone else on the team. And, and only a third of that is his hair. How is he being eaten by, to use that word again, by, it was Rob Evans at the time, who's gone on to obviously play quite a lot for Wales. But but I had a really negative opinion of him, and he's since then sorted it out, and he's really grown as a scrummager. I think he's caught up an awful lot. But there's still a little bit in me in my head that remembers that game, remembers him seeing him be completely destroyed at under 20s level by a couple of props as well. I think Wales was the worst he faced, but there are a few other games where he was really struggling in the scrum against players that have gone on to not necessarily be the best players, but he's worked hard and he sorted himself out, and he is a very good player around the field. And you can kind of see that even back then. This is a complete tangent. I can't remember where I was going with this.
We're still enjoying it.
I was just going to ask one more question on our tangent. Did you watch him much in Super Rugby Aotearoa? Because he was unbelievable.
Yeah, he was. And it's one of these things where you kind of end up slowly coming around to going, okay, he's a good level player, and then you're watching him there and you're going, oh no, he's really good, isn't he? Yeah, he's really good. I kind of need to reassess what I was thinking on him. So I have since come round, even as a little bit of prejudice. Every time I see him kind of do badly in a scrum or not do so well in a scrum anyway, a little bit of me goes, I was right.
Here's my bias.
All along.
Right.
Yeah, there he's back.
Well, speaking of player evaluations, a favourite of mine, and certainly someone who's got a lot of raps this week, Akira Ioane. Particularly, there's been a lot of headlines. I think NZ Herald headlines talking about that New Zealand's been looking for this 6 since Jerome Kano, and is Akira the answer? Obviously, some clickbait, but I thought he was fantastic. What did you think of Akira Ioane's performance, and I guess fitting into that team?
I mean,
Sorry.
No, I thought he was very, very good. And because I'm increasingly of the opinion that Shannon Frizzell doesn't work hard enough to be an international. He's got the talent to be, but he doesn't have the work ethic of an international 6.
Yeah.
Whereas Ioane put himself about. He was everywhere. He was involved in everything. And it's something Lee from the Blood and Mud podcast, we've got in the UK, always says he thinks the thing a 6 should be is amongst it. And it's more important than any stats, anything else. And he was always amongst it. He was always there. You looked up whenever there was anything kind of physical happening, he was about. And he was very often there, you didn't necessarily see him in the wide channels, as I think we've seen him in Super Rugby. He's able to do, and obviously having played 7s as well. Yeah. But otherwise, in terms of a 6's core role, especially within the All Blacks, especially within kind of like the stereotypical Southern Hemisphere role of a 6, he was absolutely there. I thought it very much looked like, this is the answer to that question. If you say since Jerome Kano,
completely agree.
And then trying last year the 2 7s, and this looked like, right, we've got him. We found him. We found who can slot in there.
I think it's been a long time coming, especially for Akira. At Super Rugby level, he's had times where he's been brilliant and then he's faded away, and he'll come out and say he's faced some mental demons and things like that. But this year he's really going to be switched on and, not be able to complete a full season. And I'm just wondering now, after that match, has it come full circle? Has he got his attitude right? Has he, completed the things that he needed to do to get to this point, and we see him lock down that jersey? And I really hope so, because I think he's a brilliant player, and it's been a long time coming for him. Was there anyone else that you would like to highlight as the standout, or someone who really shone a light for you in this match?
It would have been Akira Ioane. I think he was fantastic, though. I think there's some little player, I think a few of us kind of heard him for the first time over Super Rugby Aotearoa, who we're getting to know slowly, called Bowden Barrett, who I think Barrett was absolutely fantastic, and in quite a different way to the way we're used to him, because he is, I don't know if anyone knows it, he's a really good rugby player, and he's really well-rounded as well. He's not just the big running threat that you see when you watch highlight compilations. He is an extremely good, well-rounded player, and the sheer variety he brought to the kicking game. Mwanga was fine.
We're just losing him a little bit, so maybe we'll just buy some time on the podcast while we do this, and then say something interesting, Nelson.
critique from someone in a 15.
We just lost you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I went on a long tangent about how wonderful Bowden Barrett is.
We seamlessly covered.
You'll never notice when you hear it. But look, do you see Barrett, Bowden as a 15? Is that where you think his preferred position is?
I don't know. I think he is a 10,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it worked really well from fullback last week, and there is that kind of getting your best players on the pitch, blah, 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 blah. I felt before the start of this Tri-Nations, the All Blacks just need to pick either Mwanga or Barrett and go, you're our number one, we're going to play you at 10, rather than floating about kind of having the two, trying both of them, neither quite slotting.
Yep.
And I think the way they've used Barrett these last couple of games has, certainly this game anyway, and a little bit, I suppose, the last Wallabies game, last Ludlow game, has changed a bit, and he's less in there to choke it about and then have a little run every now and again. And he's being used as an alternate option to change the way they're playing.
Yep.
And I think that's far nicer. I still think it's not getting the best out of Mwanga. I think they're getting more Barrett than they are Mwanga, this combination. But it is almost that case to pick one, of how you're going to make it work.
Well, it's funny that the two games that they've won by a significant margin, Barrett at 15 has been really, really praised. In the games they've lost, he's been absolutely hammered for that selection. It's almost like the whole compass of the team is being dictated in the spectators' views of that 10-15 combination. And, I think it's going to be a big telltale of what happens with the All Blacks in the next 3-4 years.
Well, hold on. We can't get away from this question because it's deeply divisive between the three of us. If you had to select Bowden Barrett or Richie Mwanga at 10 for the All Blacks and they could only play 10, not 15, who are you picking?
Barrett, Bowden Barrett.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. What are the votes around the table? What else do we say? Who's saying
me.
what?
On current form, I've been saying Richie Mwanga. I think he's in too good a form, and Barrett hasn't been playing there.
And I was saying the same, similar tangent. And then you got Bodie on the bench to cover a number of positions and just absolutely light up any team.
I like his pace and a tired defence as well.
Yeah.
Untired defence.
The thing about Mwanga, though, that the All Black, I've said this in a video before, but the thing Mwanga is at his best when he's getting lots of touches, when he's just constantly on the ball. And he seems to pop up and do that for one passenger player game at the minute for the All Blacks. And otherwise, he's too busy having to slot into the way they play and having to run their systems to actually be as effective as he is for the Crusaders, where everything runs like clockwork around him anyway, and he can just slot in and do whatever he likes, and he can pick off the passes, and he can go, okay, I'm going to try a cross kick now, I'm going to try a 30-metre miss pass, I'm going to run it now. I just think when he's given more time and he's given as many, as I say, touches of the ball as possible, I think that's when he does best, and that hasn't been working for the All Blacks. But I don't know. Whereas Barrett, I think you can just slot in to do anything, and so long as he's got a little bit to adjust,
I kind of go back and forth on my thoughts about it a little bit, and whether that 10-15 combo is right and where it is. But I mean, if you've got them both on the paddock, one can stand up when the other one doesn't. I mean, if you look at the New Zealand thrashing of Australia, and Mwanga got a couple tries himself, and he had 4 line breaks, 120 metres, 5 tackle busts. He just took it upon himself in large moments in that game. So if you've got them both on the paddock, one of them is going to stand out.
Yeah.
So one of the other guys that I think was really good in this game, and I think he has the ability to drift in and out of games, to be honest, but excellent this week, was Caleb Clark. My question to you is, do you take 2020 Caleb Clark or 2019 Sevu Reece?
Oof.
Caleb Clark over Sevu Reece. Yeah, if that's the question. 27. I'd still. There's a cleaner background, cleaner history for Caleb Clark as well. He's less problematic. But I think Caleb Clark is very good, but I do still think there were maybe 2 or 3 opportunities where he could have and probably should have scored.
Yep.
And I do think he's still very green. I keep thinking this because I think there's a lot, but I rate Josh Adams, the Welsh winger, incredibly highly. Just because I think he doesn't blow chances. You know, you put him anywhere near the try line, and I always think it's a bit like, you know, the stories you hear of mothers who can suddenly lift a 2-ton car to get their child out from underneath. Like Josh Adams goes from, when he gets near the try line, he goes from being this quite, you know, like well built but not that big for a rugby player to suddenly being completely unstoppable. You know, he's so much quicker, faster, stronger, everything when he gets near the try line, and he will finish any chance.
So,
and I keep looking at those chances and going like the Caleb Clark, and I think Adams would have got a hat trick if he was in there. And there's a few other players where he's... Sorry, go on.
So you're saying Josh Adams is the mother of Wales, and Wales is basically in a lot of trouble and under a car, and he's having to lift them out of that trouble. Basically.
That's it. It's a baby that looks like Alan Wynne-Jones. Which is a really flattering look for a baby.
Yeah.
Similar hairlines, though.
I couldn't agree more. And even just then saying Adams would have had a hat-trick, I mean, the proof's in the pudding. I remember looking at Adams' last World Cup and saying, look, he doesn't excite me. He's not that impressive a guy. How is he scoring so many tries all the time? And I think you're right. Somehow he seizes every opportunity. He never doesn't score. And that's, huge.
I think there's a load of stuff. Sorry, I've turned this into a Josh Adams appreciation podcast, which I'll happily take anything.
Eventually. Can't believe it before talking about Wales.
But there's you know, his whole, when he was, I think 17, 18, he got dropped by the Scarlets and wasn't offered a professional deal because he kind of just become very lazy in, you know, he was playing for sort of Wales under 20s and he kind of stopped really trying. And I think then he kind of felt like, oh, that's it. You know, my dream's dead of this thing I've worked reasonably hard for. He then got picked up by Worcester, and then from there has been enormously, I think, because he's driven on by the fact he felt he was going to fail, and he ended up playing like the English third division, and managed to kind of work his way back up to eventually playing for Wales. And I think he's become an incredibly hard worker and incredibly focused and fixated. And yeah, sorry, I'll stop talking about Josh Adams now. But the good question was about Caleb Clark, and I think he's extremely dangerous and very, very good. Yeah. I still think he's got a lot to work on. Yeah. You know, I still think he's, to keep talking about kicking, but we saw a few times in the first game against Argentina where it was the same thing that like Lamu, Nadolo, like all of these sort of big wingers often get caught out on is you turn them, you know, you put the ball in behind them and still find some space behind. And that's just going to be a thing he's going to have to work on, you know. But I do think his finishing isn't quite there. You know, he'll score something out of nothing, or create something out of nothing, or he'll create something on, you know, he'll take a chance well if it suits him. But I still don't think he's kind of predatory in quite the way past All Blacks that Surveyor was. You know, Surveyor took every chance. Surveyor was incredible. I don't think he's quite there.
Such a breakout first game, right? So everything's gotten a little bit of a better shine on it because of that. But I completely agree.
Yeah, he's still a little bit green, but there are points in that game. He seems like he's still a man playing against children. Like just early on in that game, the way he looks for contact and runs into people. I don't know the last time I sat there and really sat back and went, he looks like an adult wanting a kid.
Yeah.
Yes.
Seriously, that's what it looks like.
And he is a kid. Like, can you imagine what he was like a few years ago when he was playing age grade?
Yeah.
And Argentina, I think, I'm not sure if they did it this week, but in the first game, they kept kicking to him, all the kickoffs, they kept kicking to him. And you were thinking, I'm not sure that's wise. Like, I get that he hasn't played much, but don't know about that. But look, please.
You got him out of the game early. You kick to him, and then you have Chocobares, and then one of the back rowers would follow up on him. So they had their biggest back and then a back rower, meaning that he wasn't then running at a winger. You know, the All Blacks couldn't get him into space, which is, it seems backwards, but it's sort of a better way of dealing with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think another huge stat coming out of this game, there's no surprise,
20.
but the run meters were 918 to 226. And obviously, all the attacking stats were reflected in that as well.
I've never seen a number that high.
That is absolutely crazy.
That's insane.
A couple hundred of those were probably from Will Jordan coming off, getting those intercepts and scoops up in his first couple touches there. But look, I think it's time to move on to the main course. Craigs, do you want to take us into that?